Hello everyone, my name is Nickson. I'm a bio major, a bio senior, graduating in June here at Kalamazoo College. Today I'm just going to share with you my SIP, which involved developing and launching this past summer the Southwest Michigan Bee Watch program, which is a citizen science initiative aimed at understanding bumblebee compositions within our Southwest Michigan region. I owe a huge thank you to the Hough Foundation for their role in funding this project through the Hough grant. It in a lot of ways made this project possible, really, through the ability to train volunteers, to take quality photos for promotional media, as well as having the ability to travel to all the sites. I definitely owe a huge thank you to the Hough Foundation, as well as everybody else who helped play a role in this project. So thank you. Without further ado, I'm going to share with you a poster that I created for this presentation. So as far as the scope for this project goes, bumblebees are declining throughout the world. And this is a really big, important issue because bumblebees as pollinators play an important role in our ecosystems. So they're definitely an organism that we want to conserve moving forward, but we can't conserve or stabilize without first understanding what populations look like. And so that calls into question, what kind of methodology are we going to use to understand what our populations look like? Citizen science is a method wherein a team of researchers will work with the surrounding community to document an organism. And so in this case, we worked with community members from the 9 counties of Southwest Michigan to document bumblebees, and therefore understand a little bit more about this population of organisms living in our region. So we created this program, the Citizen Science Program, Southwest Michigan Bee Watch, and we officially launched it publicly in the spring of 2020, so last year. And through the summer, we sought to answer 3 questions, and these questions guided our research. Number 1, is there public interest in citizen science? Number 2, is citizen science an effective tool for documenting bumblebee populations in Southwest Michigan? And number 3, using the data we collect, are there any relationships that we see between landscape composition and the bumblebee populations we document? So I want you to keep these 3 questions in mind as we move through this poster because they will be answered in our results and inform our conclusions. So I want to direct your attention to the bottom left hand of this poster because here we'll talk a little bit briefly about materials and methods. Gaining the interest of community members just involves a number of promotional media, and in terms of understanding landscape composition, we regularly visited 11 properties, including some of the swim lake properties, which were Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy properties, places like the Kalamazoo Nature Center, the Lillian Anderson Arboretum, Pierce Cedar Creek Institute. And so we regularly visited these locations and surveyed them, and then later created a composition map using Google Maps. What I really want to point your attention here to, though, is the fact that there's a key difference in citizen science methodology and what is considered more traditional being field surveys. And so citizen science methodology involves a researcher or volunteer for that matter walking through a natural area, taking their photograph of a bumblebee, later uploading that to their computer when they get home, submitting that photo to a citizen science website, where we then collect data from that website. Alternatively, field surveys consist only of a small team of researchers where they will go out into a natural area, walk transects through floral resources, identify bumblebee species in the moment, record those in a notebook, and then later use that data to assess what their population levels are. So probably the key difference here is number 1, citizen science involves volunteers, but it also involves photography, which allows a snapshot in time. So as we seek to inform question number 1 of is there public interest in citizen science, in the middle column, the top section shows on the left figure
the number of citizen scientists who submitted a photo during the 2020 season of a bumblebee to either Bumblebee Watch or iNaturalist. Interestingly, all counties are represented. The tree map on the right talks a little bit more about how this breaks down into people who signed up for our mailing list compared to citizen scientists who submitted but didn't sign up for our mailing list. So in the blue box, that's everybody who signed up for our mailing list, was interested, but didn't necessarily follow through. Alternatively, the pink box, which is much smaller than the blue, shows the proportion of people that were interested, signed up, and actually submitted as citizen scientists. Alternatively, the green box shows the proportion of people who submitted as citizen scientists without signing up or showing interest in our program. So the key difference here is that the pink is far smaller than the blue, and there's a little bit of a lack between the people who are interested in citizen science and actually end up following through. So in answer to the first question, is there public interest in citizen science? The answer is yes, there's definitely interest in citizen science with more limited follow-through. Looking at the literature, this is something that's common in the first years of citizen science programs, and there's a number of factors, including the pandemic, that likely contributed to this limited follow-through, but it is something that we're aware of and seeking to address moving forward. As we then move to the second question of is citizen science methodology an effective tool for documentation, we'll move to the middle section of this poster where we see two figures. The figure on the left compares the mean Shannon index for the citizen science methodology versus the field survey methodology. And so, number one, the mean Shannon index is just a way of measuring biodiversity. And number two, these two methods were performed by our research team every time that we visited any one of the 11 preserves we regularly visited. And so, assuming that these two methods were equal, we would see the same Shannon index. And we don't, actually. We see citizen science has a significantly higher mean Shannon index, which is an indication that this methodology documented more biodiversity. And so at the same properties, we would expect the same Shannon index, and that's not at all what we see. This is partially explained by the figure on the right, where we see the breakdown for each bumblebee species we documented, 7 in total, and which documentation method documented how many bees for each species. What I want to point your attention to here are two things. First, in the unidentifiable row, you can see the frequency of unidentified bees with the field survey methodology is far higher than that of the citizen science methodology. The other thing I want to point your attention to is citizen science did a really good job of identifying the species of conservation concern, the yellow, the black and gold, and the confusing bumblebees, where in some cases the field survey methodology didn't even document a presence of these organisms. So as we answer the second question of the efficacy of the citizen science methodology, we find that without the added benefits of the many eyes in many places idea that comes with the work of volunteers, citizen science methodology in itself allowed more identifications down to the species level, likely attributable to the fact that the photography again allows for a snapshot in time that is important for having more confidence with identifying some of the key anatomical regions of a bumblebee that are important for making diagnoses to the species level. So when we start to think about answering our final question, what sort of relationships exist between landscape composition and bumblebee populations, we'll direct our attention to this bottom section of the middle column. Now, if we were to see a relationship between landscape composition and bumblebee populations, we might see something like, with a decrease in forested landscape coverage, we see a decrease in bumblebee biodiversity, or any other landscape coverage with a trend in bumblebee biodiversity. And so using these two figures in this bottom section, there's really no discernible relationship here. Two very different properties, such as wolf tree and bow in the clouds, look different on paper. Wolf tree is very heavily forested, has a lot of green space, and that's contrasted with a property like bow in the clouds, which has a lot of surrounding built landscape. And yet, those two properties have very strong biodiversity. So in answering our final question, it appears that maybe landscape composition isn't quite as important as other factors such as floral resource availability and diversity throughout the growing season. Now, Southwest Michigan Bee Watch is a longitudinal program, so in efforts to inform our practices of future years, we do have some next steps that we derived from the outcomes of this project. And so number one, we want to continue community outreach efforts. It's awesome to connect with the community, but it would also be interesting to see whether there's any barriers that are preventing citizen scientists who are interested from actually submitting. Number two, we would love to hold in-person field days, as we see these as opportunities to really connect with our citizen scientists, to instill some confidence in their documentation practices, as well as build a sense of collective common purpose. Number three, we want to continue informing future conservation practices through our documentation. And so obviously our goals are set on long-term conservation of these bumblebees, and so our efforts will hopefully be able to inform practices in the future. So overall, this has been a very successful first year for launching our program. We owe a lot of thanks to the Hough Foundation for their support in this project. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what we do, or if you're interested in becoming a citizen scientist, feel free to check out our website at swimbees.kzoo.edu.